So thank you so much for inviting me to speak today, and I'm really excited to be here with actually some old friends and some new friends. My background is actually as a consultant biochemist, so I, until quite recently, headed specialised laboratories over at St Thomas's. So what I'm going to talk to you about this morning is where we're going within NHS England with regards to a strategy for personalised medicine. I haven't got all the answers. This is the start of a journey. We've been asked and tasked by the NHS England board to produce a strategy, and we're working at pace. We've engaged with many of you over the last few months. And what we do know, and what we've heard over the last few months, is personalised medicine is nothing new in some ways, because actually if we go back to William Osler 100 years ago, what he talked about is that it's more important to know what sort of patient has a disease than what sort of a disease a patient has. And I think we need to reflect this, actually kind of go back to sort of simple first principles. What we've also found over the last few months is that actually there's a staggering number of definitions. You say tomato, I will say tomato, and actually personalised medicine means different things to different people. And actually in some ways when we take it back down to the patient, many patients think this is just about choice. This is about choice about where they may want to have their care taken or what treatments they may wish to have. Where we are within NHS England is considering a personalised medicine strategy. So this is really thinking about building on the power of genomics and other medical technologies and diagnostics, but really thinking about how we engage and empower our patients in this whole journey with us. So within NHS England, this paper went to the board in September, and we've defined personalised medicine as a move away from the one-size-fits-all culture that we have within the NHS, to really think about an individualised approach to the treatment of care of our patients with particular conditions. And it builds on the explosion and exponential growth of the technologies we have, both in terms of genomics, but other technologies such as metabolomics and other diagnostic interventions. But at the end of the day, where we want to get to is to be able to better manage our patients' health and target those therapies to achieve the best patient outcomes. So in terms of our vision and where we want to go to, we're really building on the 4 Ps of personalised medicine. So this is about using prognostics to predict disease, using targeted preventions and new strategies, having a much more precise diagnosis than we have currently, but using all of this to develop a much more participatory role for our patients, to engage them and empower them to take a much more front-facing role within their own healthcare. But where we're leading to is a theranostic approach, where we're linking diagnostics with the data to have an increasing efficiency for the use of those treatments. And we already know this works when we're thinking about Herceptin within breast cancer. We've had these examples for quite a number of years. But also identify within our population, and Munir talked about this really eloquently, about how we stratify and use treatments most appropriately for different subgroups of our populations. Now, within NHS England, we are looking at everything we're doing through the lens of the 5-year forward view. And this is the vision that's been set out by all of the national bodies within the health service, including NHS England, our colleagues within Public Health England and Health Education England, for example. But this is a shared vision of how we need to move forward and transform the care within the NHS. And there's no doubt that we're facing quite significant challenges. We know we have a health and wellbeing gap, and I used to, until a few years ago, used to be the scientific director for London, and it used to be really striking. You'd be in Chelsea, and not very long along the tube line, you'd get to Whitechapel. Huge differences in the socio-economic problems that each of those, some of our populations are facing. But the health outcomes reflect that as well. We know we've got more to do in reducing inequalities between our communities. We also need to recognise that we have a care and quality gap. There are, within our own specialties, as a scientist within diagnostics and scientific services, there are still gaps within the quality of some of our services. We've got more to do. And we have to recognise that we're still within constrained financial times. We still have significant funding and efficiency gaps that has to be filled. But I would argue very strongly as a scientist that science, innovation, all the things that you're doing here today actually have the power to deliver much of the transformation that will need to happen within the health service. So when we're thinking about addressing these gaps within the NHS, we're thinking about this in a number of ways. The first is around thinking about the NHS as a social movement. So this is about a different contract, a different relationship and narrative with our patients and our public. Realising that many of our big killers, such as cancer, such as cardiovascular disease, there's still an underlying cause in terms of obesity, smoking, drinking alcohol. There's the things that we as individuals need to take control of. We know we need to think differently about some of the provision of our healthcare systems. So we're looking at, for example, with the Vanguard site, some really innovative models that have been rolled out nationally. But we also know that we need to get better at some of the current models, such as in primary care or within A&E. But again, we've got a huge opportunity with the technology and the information that we have coming. We know that we've got enormous amounts of clinical and diagnostic data. We know that we're doing this with the large-scale initiatives such as genomics. This is how we're going to make the transformation happen and close those gaps. So in terms of thinking about the personalised medicine strategy in relation to the 5-year forward view, what we firmly believe is that a personalised medicine strategy really delivers on many of those gaps that we need to close. So this is about improving prevention, because we understand what the predisposition of an individual is. We're getting better at earlier diagnosis of disease as a result of identifying that abnormality. We're much more precise about our diagnosis. And then we can target our interventions through the use of other companion diagnostics, for example. But what we're trying to do is use science and innovation to transform the health service and revolutionise the way in which we provide care. And we've done this over time. This is what we know, for example, if we look at the DNA, the story of DNA, the story of genomics, we're moving at pace so, in these years. It's really quite, when I think about when I started within the health service 20 years ago, we used to do newborn screening by what could only be described as old-fashioned bucket chemistry, big tanks of solvents. It would take us 2 days to identify a big blob on a piece of card that would tell you the child might have phenylketonuria. Over at the labs at St Thomas's, they're able to look at 50 plus, up to 100 different conditions within 2 minutes on one tiny finger prick of blood. Extraordinary changes in the way that technology has revolutionised. And really the starting point for where we're thinking about personalised medicine is the door that's been opened through the 100,000 Genomes project. So as many of you in the room will be involved with this will know that in December 2012, David Cameron set out and launched the project to sequence whole genome sequencing of 100,000 patients with cancer or rare diseases. And what was understood then was that by unlocking the power of this DNA, we'll actually not only be able to really care and make a difference to the patients in our own country, but actually lead the global race in terms of using the really quite high-tech diagnostics. And the legacy of the 100,000 Genomes project is really being embedded within the NHS. We're moving at pace on this. And although it's a project that should end within the next year or so, what we know is that the difference that it's making already. We're already beginning to understand the different pathologies of patients who have gone into the 100,000 Genome project. We've been able to accelerate the uptake of advanced genomic medicine practice into the NHS. And I think what's been really extraordinary over the last 2 years has been the different conversation we've been able to have with the public and our patients on this. A really engaged, grown-up, adult conversation about, actually, is this the direction that we want to go? What do we want to do with all this data? And there's no doubt about it, not only is it important for our health, it's also important for our economic recovery. And this is part of the whole UK Life Sciences strategy and how we build ourselves a growing industry. And one of the things that's been really extraordinary about the 100,000 Genomes project, and I know that, for example, Angela and Richard are here from the GMCs, that it's spearheaded a different way of working. And I don't think I've seen anything within pathology or diagnostics that's moved at pace like this over the last 20 years. What we've been able to do through the designation of the 13 genomic medicine centres is really work in a very, very different way. So in the 13 GMCs, there's a network structure with a lead contractor, one lead site, that then has local delivery partners who are all working together. Well, what they've been able to do at scale and pace is to agree the data sets, agree the way in which they're consenting, capture that data, standardise the way the laboratories use their protocols. So it was really interesting hearing from Munir how challenging is it that it can be. And I don't underestimate that at all. Having led labs for a long time, it is really hard. But this shows we can do it. This shows we can do it at scale and pace. One of the important things that's come out of the genomic medicine centres has been the handling of that data. How do we get to grips with the enormous amounts of data that are coming out? Because at the moment, we're really sitting mainly within this place here around the genotyping. But a whole genome sequencing, we're getting phenomenal amounts of data coming through that has to be linked up. And I'm a biochemist, so I need to put my call in that this is not just about genomics. This is about how we link all the other data from the proteomics, from the metabolomics, vast amounts of data that need to be linked together. And the way that we're going to deliver on a personalised medicine strategy will be about collaboration and integrating all of this data from all of the different sources, be it from the billion-plus diagnostic tests that we do currently, be it through the new technologies such as the whole genome sequencing or a metabolomics approach, into the clinical data that's held within the GP records or within the secondary care. But we could take it a step further, and I'm sure there's people in this room today who's got their little devices that's told them how many steps they've measured and what their heart rate might be. We could go further and actually link that to it as well to give us really early indicators. And then at an economic and social level, we can link it into where we are within population data. So we've got vast quantities of data currently, and more coming. So we need to be really, really good at agreeing what that data set is, agreeing what it means, and linking it all together so we actually can generate the knowledge that we need. Because where we may get to is a position where in an individual, you're able to wrap around all of that data, be it from diagnostic testing, be it from your own measures, be it from your whole genome sequencing that may have been done at some point, and measure this ongoing through life. And it may be that that's where you're going to get the personalised approach it's about the individual and how your own markers are changing with disease or with ageing. To do this is going to require step change, and I think Munir touched on it earlier. We're going to have to think about machine learning, we're going to have to think about really kind of smart analytics to really understand, at pace how we really bring all that data together around an individual. But we're beginning to see green shoots of this, and it was wonderful to hear the kind of elegant scientific approach that Munir's taken to the warfarin example. But we're seeing this in other areas. So this is an example of the management of a particular type of diabetes, where we start with very simple measures such as a patient's BMI or their HbA1c, which is an early marker, and bring in a number of other calculations as you go on, bring in other biomarkers. But when you get to the genetic testing, it really can begin to understand where you treat, what treatment a different patient needs. So this is happening, this is work from Exeter. We also know within the cancer pathways, this is some work being done on chronic myeloid leukemia, that patients actually will change over time, and actually their treatment will need to change depending on their underlying pathology and the genomics. But again, this is beginning to happen. There's pockets of it. But as I said, with machine learning, we really need to build on this. And again, there's ideas coming out. This is some great stuff being developed in Stanford University, where they're looking at pathology and they're looking at actually, and I would hate to say it, there are pathologists in the room, could it be better that a machine would actually be able to diagnose cancer from a histopathology tissue better than a pathologist? I'm not putting the pathologist out of a role, but there's something here that we need to think about how we get smarter about bringing in these new technologies. And as a biochemist, I need to make sure that when I'm putting the call in, this is not just about genomics. This is about ensuring that we are linking in all of the biomarkers and all the technologies that we may have at our fingertips in the future. This is some really exciting work being done in Imperial, looking at in surgery, use of mass spectrometry to look at individual biomarkers so they can actually make decisions about where they're cutting out the tumour. Now, what's interesting from, say, a metabolite approach as opposed to where we are with genomics, we're a long way from any of this being embedded within routine practice within the NHS. We've got a lot to do in terms of thinking about these new technologies. So where we are within NHS England and thinking about our strategic approach and where we take a role in terms of the NHS moving forward, is that we're really considering how we tailor treatment and management to an individual patient's makeup. So at the moment, I've talked about this one-size-fits-all treatment based on its symptoms. Our specialties, I think we already heard it earlier, are organised by organ or specialty specific. That's how we run our services. Although we're beginning to do it in genomics, we still have limited use of genomic and metabolic and other biomarkers, and we're not linking the data at all. Not even within pathology are we linking the data on an individual. But where we want to get to is an individual tailored approach. This may lead to a new taxonomy of disease. So actually, you're considering the treatment by the underlying cause and personal response. We're able to link diagnostics to give a comprehensive full picture of an individual, and this will enable us to have tailored treatments and therefore lead to better outcomes for our patients. And this may lead us to a stage where we actually move away from being an illness-based health system to a health-based health system. So we're really on the front foot, we're being proactive. Because we know at the moment we've got delayed diagnosis. It's unacceptable that patients are turning up with late-stage disease. Many of them have multiple conditions, and many have poor outcomes and poor patient experience. So we want to use personalised medicine to put us on the front foot and then use that science and technology to improve outcomes. So prognosis, earlier diagnosis, how can we influence lifestyle factors by working with our patients and population, and how can we stratify those treatments? Now, one of the questions earlier is, what can we do nationally? Now, where we sit within NHS England is about setting the strategy and working with all our partners, because it can't be just one person or one set of one organisation leading this and doing this. So our role is really to work across and align with the other system partners, for example, around the funding models, or how do we work with charity and patient groups. Huge issues that we're going to have to tackle around workforce and education and training. A lot to do, and a lot for all of us, a role for all of us to play. But I do think I need to get my feet back on the ground, because there's a recognition that it's really, really difficult out there. And this is a piece of work that we did last year within the CSO team, looking at the commissioning of diagnostics currently. So things that we should be doing, no-brainers that are in the NICE guidance. Is an example from heart failure, where we know we should be doing natriuretic peptide. What we did was do a deep dive, find out what at the top, this is all the various different provision models at the top, and at the bottom is how it's commissioned. And I would say it's ad hoc at best. With siloed budgeting, all of the things that we know are really challenging are well described, but that's what's happening out there now. So we're a long way from our vision. You know, we've got a lot to do, and I think, again, Munir described it so well, the challenges of getting one single pilot in. But I'm a natural optimist, and I would also say that we're ahead of the curve. And what's happened over the last few years in the UK is that actually we have begun to align many of these pieces of work, for example, with the MRC, with the NIHR. A lot of the sort of funding streams are really on the front foot around stratified and personalised medicine. We know now that many of the sort of the big centres across the world are beginning to put lots of money into academic and research pots of money. But where we stand in the NHS is in an unusual position, in that we are a semi-integrated health system. We have the ability to do something around commissioning, and we're on the front foot of this. So where we are in terms of our strategy is ensuring that it's aligned to the 5-year forward view. This is how we're going to get traction within the health system that we're working. So we think about the new models of care, and this is thinking about actually how do we put diagnostics and place them in these new service provisions. And this is not just the really high-tech technologies I've talked about in terms of genomics and metabolomics, but simple point of care testing that could be done out in the community. How do we support self-care for some patients with long-term conditions? We also know that with the existing services, we've got a lot to do in terms of a clinical change model. So this is about how do we actually link the systems that we currently have, link the data we have, and really take those challenging decisions about what services should look like. And I think there was a comment earlier about actually we need to be really brave about making decisions about what service provision should look like. We've got an extraordinary opportunity around science and technology to really adopt that at scale and pace across the NHS to make those difference. And what we need to do within NHS England is to align the policy and strategy with our other system partners, so we're taking this forward as a whole system. So in terms of, I tend to think in diagrams, so this is where we are. Starting from DNA, starting from the door that's opened with the 100,000 Genome Project, wrapping around the functional genomics pathway, so thinking about how do we link in proteomics, metabolomics, and that other diagnostic, for example, imaging data. How do we link that with phenotypic characterization and, for example, opportunities from patient self-reporting? And that leads us to a world in which we are actually able to personalise therapies. And I just wanted to leave you with this, because I think this is what grounds me as a scientist working within the NHS. And this is about why we're here, and why we're here working within the NHS, and why I'm here talking to you from the NHS England. And what we want to do in the NHS is to improve the health and well-being of our patients and populations. But as a scientist, the bit that always rings true for me in the NHS Constitution, it says it works at the limits of science, bringing the highest levels of human knowledge and skill to save lives and improve health. We've got an extraordinary opportunity to do that. An extraordinary opportunity on the back of the work that's been done around the 100,000 Genomes projects. There's no doubt that we've got work to do. There's no doubt there's going to be lots of challenges. But actually, I believe that we can make a real difference to our patients and our populations that we serve through this approach. So thank you.